And we're back.
So I think kind of to the point I'm trying to make is the way that we think about how we put people in positions to experience something or to show the experience of something that someone lives with on a daily basis because they can't change it versus it happened to them by circumstance. So like living with schizophrenia versus living with PTSD, right? Like I personally don't feel okay watching a movie where, you know, someone has clearly not, but is trying to experience a like actual mental health disorder versus how you show how a person experiences something that like is a result of situations in their life, right? It's like that, can you change it versus can you change it? I just recently rewatched Brothers, which is I think an okay portrayal of PTSD as a result of the Iraqi war, and how it's like a very small glimpse into like one specific situation that can occur as a result of those, you know, unresolved feelings for a person. Do I think that it would have been different if they had actually found a veteran to help them write that or to help them portray it? Or if Tobey Maguire had actually spent time with veterans who were suffering from PTSD as a result of the war? Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to, you know, inform the performance with authenticity as much as possible. I totally agree with that. Like,
I think the big difference that we see in like, and I don't want to put all of the, I'm not putting all of the responsibility on the actors themselves, because there's a lot of things that go into making a movie. I think a lot of the responsibility should fall on the people who write it. And some writers, you know, have really taken up the mantle and have done the hard work to not just create a compelling piece of media and a compelling piece of entertainment, but to truly represent what they're trying to present, you know. And some writers do the due diligence of like, okay, I want to represent, you know, the effects of social media and how it, you know, affects a young teen with an eating disorder's ability to thrive. You know, like one of the movies that I put on there was one called To the Bone, and it's about a young girl who suffers with anorexia. And the writers of that movie did a ton of research. They talked to a ton of people, including not only like social media influencers who openly talk about their experiences with it, but like actual people who were in treatment and the people who treated them, so that all of the characters in that movie were very authentic and represented in a way that didn't do harm. It was almost like a fictional documentary, if that makes sense. You know, like it was documenting real experience from a fictional perspective.
Yeah. As someone that like has studied screenwriting and made short films, I agree with you. Like the writers need to do their research, but one of the most frustrating things to experience as a writer is when you put a lot of effort into something, try to make it authentic, and then as it goes down the chain of production, it just gets bastardized. You know, like some producer who contributed, you know, 10 grand to the production might show up and say, we're changing this just because I think it looks cool, you know, whatever it is. So like,
but I think there's also, I think there's been a shift, I think, in the way that writers influence production, because when you look at things like, and maybe this just depends on who is producing the thing,
right.
but when you think about writer influence on the end product of a production, like Stephenie Meyer was incredibly involved in Twilight and it turned out exactly how she wanted. George R.R. Martin was incredibly involved in Game of Thrones up until like the last couple seasons, and it turned out exactly how he wanted. Greg Nicotero was incredibly involved with Eric, I can't remember his name at the moment, but with the beginning seasons of The Walking Dead. And it was incredible television. And maybe they have more control in television because all the examples I gave, except for Twilight, were television. But, you know, maybe it's about finding the right people to make things, you know? Like, there's such a volume of content that's made nowadays too,
Yeah.
that it's, I guess, maybe a little more difficult because people want to shop around and find the best, I guess, bottom line for what they're trying to do, because it's all about money at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things being made now, as you mentioned. There's like so many different studios and things like that. You're gonna get the gamut, things that are really authentic and excellent, and things that are just fluffy, sensationalized, whatever. But I think to put a bit of onus on the audience, it's a good idea to find those people that do produce authentic media and follow them, or just be aware of their work and what they're doing. um, there's a fantastic writer named Charlie Kaufman, who he's a screenwriter and he started directing. um, and his career astounds me because the films he makes are so unique and they're weird. They're not your typical commercial film. So I think there's an element of luck in his career that he's happened to meet the right people at the right times and get his movies made. But he often includes angles on mental health in his work. And based on what I've learned about him through interviews and things like that, he seems to be somebody that has had struggles and acknowledges them and includes that in his work. And to me, it seems very authentic, and entertaining. You know what I mean? So some
Mhm.
of his movies, he did Being John Malkovich, which is just an
Oh,
insane
I
movie.
love that one.
I love that movie too. I actually
John
watched it.
Malkovich is actually just really great. So
I love him in
I've
every.
had
If
a
he starts
had a
yelling at
crush on
somebody, I
him since
love
I was a kid.
it. He also did Adaptation with.
Ooh, also a really good one with Nicolas
I
Cage,
love that movie. That's an excellent movie. And he did one. He wrote Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind.
which was on my
Um,
list.
I actually haven't
Um,
seen that one. I've avoided that because I'm certain it's going to make me cry like a little bitch. So I'm like, I can't
oh, he
watch it.
did. I'm thinking of Ending Things as well.
Yeah, that was a recent one. I think he directed that. He did a bizarre one
Uh,
called Anomalisa, which I watched and I was just like, what is this? It made me
I'm looking
feel
at his
uncomfortable.
IMDb page here.
Um, what was I saying? Yeah, Anomalisa is a fascinating one. It's one of these ones I think fits into that category of helping you to cultivate empathy for people that are experiencing something weird. It puts you into the perspective of how they experience the world. And that one's about a guy who kind of has, I guess he's experiencing a sort of malaise. He's sort of unhappy and isn't sure why. And as the film progresses, you learn he's a bit dissatisfied in, I think it's his marriage, or at least with his girlfriend. And then he meets someone else. But an interesting device that film uses is that there's only two voice actors. I think maybe there's three voice actors, but everyone he encounters has the same voice until he meets this other person, Lisa, Anomalisa. She has the only unique voice that he hears in the film. And it's such an interesting device because I didn't even notice it at first. I was like, man, these people all sound the same. And as I'm watching, I'm like, yeah, every
Mhm.
single person has the same voice. And it just in watching the film, I got to experience what that would be like. Like this character's going through his day. He hears the same person. If I remember, everybody else has the same face. Um, and I'm like,
So
this
kind of like a
is,
Scanner Darkly almost.
yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen that one, but those people have like changing faces and things. They have like a
Yes, but
suit that they can wear.
it's like a randomized thing, or you can have like a preset one. But um, there's like I'm pretty sure there's like a scene in there where everyone has the same one because something happens.
Yeah, it's been way too long since I've seen that movie. I don't remember it very well, but I really liked Anomalisa just because it put me in a perspective I wasn't used to. Another one is a film called Jacob's Ladder. Do you know that one?
That one was on the list several times. Like, when I was like kind of looking around at what other people were saying were really good representations, and I've never seen it, so I didn't want to include it on the list because I don't
Hmm.
have an opinion on things I've never seen.
Yeah, yeah, and that's fair. I would say that one's a difficult watch, and there's different interpretations of it, but it really gives you a perspective of somebody who is losing their sanity, and it's built into the the form of the film, the way the film's edited. You know what I mean? And I like that
Mhm.
stuff. So
So
the
kind of like The
character,
Shining, how like as his sanity devolves, the image of the hotel kind of changes.
yeah, like there's a common technique called the canted angle or the Dutch angle, which usually signifies things are demented in some way. And that's literally just taking the camera and shifting it a little bit. Like I could do it with my webcam. And if you film things at that angle, the audience, whether it could be really subtle, but the audience starts to pick up on that things aren't lining up right. You know, things are just
Mhm.
slightly leaning, and it helps contribute to making the audience feel the discomfort that the characters are feeling. I love that. So Jacob's
Mhm.
Ladder is, you know, to me, some people talk about if it's about somebody who's dying or if it's about somebody who's going, you know, through a divorce or something. And I think all those interpretations are valid. But one thing it reminds me of is my alcohol abuse, just because of how settings change and you get these like gaps in time and things like that. I know if you haven't seen the movie, it's like hard to imagine what I'm talking about, but the film's very disorienting, and it really reminds me of like binging when I would wake up and not know what day it is or what time it is or where I am, or how long I've been binging and things like that. The film is kind of confusing in a what I think a really effective way, and it's built into the form of the film. But that's different than something like Silver Linings Playbook, which is kind of more of a straightforward film. I want to say more a traditional film. Like it doesn't use a lot of crazy techniques or anything. It just kind of presents these people's lives to you in a pretty
Mhm.
straightforward. I haven't actually seen the entirety of that film, but I do remember watching it, and you get the sense of how stressful it is to live with someone. He has borderline personality disorder, I think, and how disruptive that is to.
I think the portrayal for him was bipolar disorder,
Oh,
and then the girls suffer, like Jennifer Lawrence's character is suffering from like PTSD and like overwhelming grief, essentially, of
mm.
the death of her husband.
But you do get a sense of like their lives, how things are difficult for them. One of the things you included on the list was A Million Little Pieces,
I do
and
love that one. It's more tackling from an addiction angle, but
yeah,
I think it did a really good job of really helping someone understand the situations and the emotions that a person feels while they're being forcibly injected into a detox and recovery scenario. Um, and I thought it was a really interesting kind of melancholy to it almost, because a lot of the films that I've seen like that, and another one I included was like 28 Days with Sandra Bullock. That one was like way more lighthearted and same kind of concept, but very, very different feels.
mm. Yeah, one's a little bit. Would you say one's more palatable than the other? Like sometimes things are made more palatable to be more commercial when it's perhaps less authentic.
Well, I mean, everyone knows Sandra Bullock, and that movie specifically was made, at a time where her career was really taking off.
Mm.
It was like in the Hope Floats and like Lake House kind of era, like in between there. So, she was a well-respected actress and known for taking on these kind of large, difficult, emotional
Mm.
roles. And it has Viggo Mortensen, and there's a bunch of top billed actors in that one. So it certainly shows a different kind of experience, I guess. And maybe it was showing it from like the experience of an alcoholic woman versus a pill addicted man.
Yeah, yeah. If you something that comes to mind, like the counter to something a little bit more polished or palatable, would be something like We Need to Talk About Kevin. I don't know if
I
you've.
do love that one. It was on a lot of those lists and I do love it, but because I view it as more of like a horror film and less of a mental health film, although it does touch on that. And I guess the comparison to where I draw the line there would be Midsummer, where it's like very clearly a horror film, but that is very clearly about someone having a mental health crisis,
Right.
you know, and how they can be easily reeled into things that are very overwhelming and then essentially just give themselves up to them. Whereas like we have to talk about Kevin is also someone very clearly experiencing a mental health crisis, but then going like completely off the rails about it.
Yeah. But with we need to talk about Kevin. It's like it's a situation where there's something going on and there's like no resources available or no support. You know, it's like I really feel for Tilda Swinton's character in that film, where like, you
I
know,
also really just love Tilda Swinton.
she's incredible and she's the best.
I don't think I've seen her in anything where I was like, this was not great. Maybe arguably Doctor Strange, but
whatever.
even that was still pretty good.
I haven't seen any of those ones, but
the MCU is just like way out of control. It's way out of control. Thanks,
yeah,
Disney.
they scored out a new movie every 10 minutes. Like I think just since we started this podcast, they've probably published 10 movies. I just get tired, derail our conversation talking about how much I dislike superhero movies.
I love superheroes. Do I think that it's a genre that should have been expanded? Yes. Do I think that they have completely saturated that market now and that no one is interested anymore? Absolutely.
Yeah, some people are really interested. It's kind of like zombies. Like there was like a new zombie movie every 10 minutes not that long ago. And
yeah, and then The Walking Dead killed it.
well, yeah, but I mean, even after that, they just kept pumping them out. I think I just remember reading somebody like Netflix or Amazon published something saying they're doing another zombie TV show, and all the comments underneath were like, "Why?" You know,
yeah,
like
it's probably the
so
Walking
many.
Dead spinoff. There's more of them now because they have so the original Walking Dead. Okay, I'm rewatching the series right now actually because I loved it. I own some of the seasons like physically. I have a ton of comic books. Loved it before it was a show. You know, loved the graphic novels when they were coming out. They also have Fear the Walking Dead, which is like the same concept but in a different place in America. And now they have billed, I saw it on IMDb, a movie which like explains what happened to Rick Grimes when he like left in season 8 or something. And they have like spin-off shows coming for some of the other characters, Daryl and Carol. And what I found really interesting about that and why I think people are all like, why are you doing this? Is because Daryl was never in the original comic books, so they're just making shit up at this point for the sake of making it, you know?
Well, it's just, and that's just one IP. That's just one IP of zombie stuff. Like,
there's so much.
You know, and they're all the same. You know, I liked one that was really different was Kingdom. Do you know that one?
No, but I was gonna say Warm Bodies.
Oh, it's like a romance with a zombie.
Yeah, but it's like, it's not even that, I don't know. It was a different take on zombies because I feel like zombies are always like, you live, you die, you become a zombie, and that's it. Whereas like Warm Bodies was like, you live, you die, love can make you not dead anymore. And I thought that was a really cute approach to the idea of zombies because it hadn't really been done before. Yeah. And I love Nicholas Hoult as well. I think he's been fantastic in a lot of things that he's done.
He takes interesting roles.
It was interesting to see that kind of zombie portrayal, I guess.
Yeah, it vaguely reminds me of something called, I think it's called In the Flesh, which was a mini series that it's like, you know, there was a zombie apocalypse, a lot of terrible things happened, but then somebody invented a cure that could bring the zombies back and make them less feral. But it kind of just turns into a really, really shallow allegory for homophobia.
Like, oh, love that.
Like I was watching it, it just like, suddenly it's like kind of a love story about two gay zombies, and it's like they don't have to be zombies, you know what I mean? Like, it's all about how the small community persecutes them for being gay, and it has nothing to do with them being zombies. I don't know, it's just cheap. It was like they slapped zombies onto you know, If Beale Street Could Talk or Call Me by Your Name or something like that. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
anyway. Oh, that vaguely reminds me of another film that was on the list, Risk Cutters. Um,
I adore that movie. It's kind of problematic, I'm not gonna lie. And like on the list, I said that there's like this weird kind of subgenre where it's like people experiencing mental health crises but fall in love. Like they
yeah,
find that commonality in it, you know?
is that a weird
Um,
romanticization of mental
oh,
illness?
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's why it's problematic.
yeah.
That's why it's problematic.
You do see that. Like, I think alcoholism is something that's historically been really romanticized in a lot of media, and you do see that
It
too
absolutely has been.
with like, you know, I think
At
depression.
every turn, alcoholism has been romanticized.
Yeah,
The same way that smoking used to be.
yeah, yeah. I can't believe it. Like, I used to smoke and I've quit smoking, but
Hey,
um
good job.
thank you. I've quit a few times.
Haven't we all? Haven't we all? I quit for the like seventh time earlier this year.
Oh, good for you. I struggle more so with like the drinking. It's like when I see people smoking in TV shows, I don't get any cravings or anything, but it's like sometimes with drinking in TV shows and movies, I'm like, man, I can just like feel my body having the physiological response, right? Like the
Hmm.
trigger that makes it want to happen. And I think that's an interesting thing to talk about is like, what's the responsibility of filmmakers to, you know, protect people that have triggers and things like that, like someone like me that
I
might
mean,
be facing alcohol addiction, and if I want to watch a
I
movie, can it have alcohol use in it if it's going to trigger me?
I agree. And I think that we've seen that kind of shift with smoking specifically. Like, how many shows have you seen recently where people are just like openly smoking, aside from Mad Men?
Ah, that's the first one that came to mind. They drink and smoke nonstop in that show.
Yeah, because it was a period piece. Like that was common. But like in modern television, can you think of like a teen show where they're like smoking?
No, you really, I mean, I don't
And
watch that much TV, but you don't see a lot of smoking.
if they are, does it have the warning at the top
Oh, I
when
don't
you
think I've
start the
ever.
episode?
Uh, oh, at
I'm
the
watching The Walking
beginning
Dead right now, and it
and
absolutely at the beginning of every episode has a warning at the top that says
smoking.
like violence, nudity, smoking. There's some that say drinking,
Yeah,
because drinking on that show is not super common, but I think more people are starting to recognize that like they at least have the responsibility to warn people like, hey, this could trigger you. Do I ultimately think that consuming media that triggers you is your own responsibility? Absolutely, I do.
yeah. Well, and
Like
I agree. Like,
if I think that I'm going to be triggered by a piece of content, am I willingly going to watch it and then be angry about it? Absolutely not. Do I think that a lot of people do that, like have that behavior?
yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
I'm going to
But
stub my toe and blame it on you for owning this piece of furniture. Like,
yeah, it's it maybe as long as people are having the conversations and stuff, yeah, I don't see any need to censor, you know, drinking and smoking. They just be reasonable about it. Don't market smoking to kids. Like that's
mhm.
bullshit. I don't want to
Well,
see
I
you
think
know, Caillou
there's
smoking or whatever.
fuck Caillou. There's a conversation that's happening, I think, in presenting media to young people and the responsibility that they carry about certain things. Because I mean, I've seen disclaimers at the beginning of shows. And I think when it comes to mental health, one that comes to mind was 13 Reasons, where they have
Mm,
a disclaimer at the beginning and at the end of every episode that's like, hey, this could trigger you, this could trigger you. And then at the end, it's like, if you're experiencing mental health, like it's important that you talk to somebody, here's some resources, da, da, da. And I think that although the piece of media itself was really controversial and probably could have been done with not being made,
yeah,
the precedent that they set by doing those things has changed the way that people think about their responsibility as filmmakers and as content creators.
yeah. That's an interesting case study, 13 Reasons Why or whatever. I haven't seen the show, but I did read the book. And I'm curious, do you know, is that something I feel like that came from Oprah? Like I
I
think
did
she
not read the book. I didn't even know it was one, but I have seen almost all of the show.
yeah, but the show, like if it's anything like the book, isn't it kind of just like it's bullshit? Like it didn't strike me as very good, and it really seemed
There was,
to romanticize like spiteful suicide. Like,
yeah, there was a lot of things with that
what
show
an
that were like
angle.
super, super, super problematic. I think that it had good intentions. And I think that it was trying to do something that not a lot of people have been trying to do, but they went around, they picked a piece of content that in and of itself was not great. And then they went about it in a way that was also very problematic and just were like, we're going to put it out there to the universe and just see what people think,
Hmm.
and I think that they started good conversations by doing so. Again, I think this is one of those like, someone has to be the one, someone has to make the change, and even if you don't like it, it's out there.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
maybe they didn't do it well, but they did it.
and they got
So
people talking about it. Yeah.
yeah, in that respect, I respect what they did and what they've been doing and trying to do in the way of media that we present young people. Another interesting one is an Amazon Prime exclusive called The Wilds. It's about
That
these,
sounds
like, it's like
familiar.
a kind of essentially a psychological experiment on, and it's very like Lord of the Flies reminiscent,
Hmm.
um, on a group of girls that they like present with the idea that they've been in a plane crash and are stranded on this island, and how do they provide for themselves and interact with each other. And then the second season kind of comes out that they did this to two different groups of people. And for the first little bit of the episodes, you think that this is what's actually happened, and then you're presented as the viewer with the idea that this was planned and it was done to these people. And like, they kind of at some point almost have this like hint that the girls are figuring out that it was all planned, like the cracks start to form and you can kind of see it. So I think there's lots of situations in that show particularly that can trigger people, tons of them.
Hmm.
Do I think that viewers are the ones responsible for choosing whether or not to partake in watching it? Yes I do. But that one doesn't have any like, it doesn't have warnings at the beginning of it. You don't really know until you watch it.
Yeah, I don't know about those warnings because I watch a lot of the Next Generation on Netflix,
Hmm.
and at the beginning it says in the top corner it says sex, fear, and it's like those are two things I don't associate with TNG that much. Like it doesn't even say violence or anything like that, and like
Hmm.
you'll see them drinking on the show and things like that. Why is the warning sex, fear? Like
Well, I
what?
mean, I think
What
that
does
the
that
people
even
who
mean?
make the show also are the people who assign those.
Hmm.
So it may depend on like who is submitting this information.
Yeah.
Like I really doubt that Netflix employs a person to actually watch these shows and assign them, like warnings.
Yeah.
I think it's up to the filmmaker. So if you get like, people who think that intelligent people watch this show and are not going to be triggered by literally everything they see, they're probably not going to add a ton
Yeah.
of warnings.
So I guess the warnings seem like a pretty
It's a
weak
preemptive
solution
strike.
or something.
Well, I mean, I think it's a preemptive strike to stop people from bitching about their own choices.
Yeah. 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 I guess like if the problem is if we're still talking about people getting triggered by content and things like that, wouldn't the more robust solution be to make sure that people are equipped to encounter information that might trigger them, and then know the steps to not succumb to that trigger, right? You know what I mean? Like if there was things in schools,
Yes,
in
but what you're talking
society.
about is investing money that has to come from somewhere to fix a much larger problem than just slapping a warning label on it.
Yeah,
I
you're
know
right.
there's a few comedians that have talked about this over the years. I think Jeff Foxworthy is probably one of the more notable ones because he's talked about it a lot and like makes a lot of jokes about it.
Hmm.
But like if you took warning labels off of stuff, stupid people would cease to exist, you
Yeah.
know, because because that's the simple solution to a much larger problem. Yes, we could just teach people not to do stupid shit, but the undertaking is so massive and so complex that sometimes it just requires a simple warning label.
Yeah, it's the
You know?
economical solution. Yeah. Yeah, it's weird how often we go for the economical solution, eh? Yeah. The warning labels stuff, even with the warning labels, like the Tide Pod trend that was going on there for a little bit, where people
Well,
would
that's
like,
the thing where, like, do you need to have a warning label that says don't put this in your mouth? Because logical people would look at that and say don't put that in your mouth. But
yeah,
clearly, stupid people need the warning.
but it's absurd. Like that is a movement in stupidity. Like that was something
Oh,
I don't
absolutely.
hear about it so much now, but for a while there, it was in the news a lot. It was like kids. I don't know if it was on TikTok or where it was being spread around, but some influence there was encouraging kids to put Tide Pods in their mouth and to eat it. What was it? To see how many you could fit, or just to eat one? You know, it's
Oh,
like,
I don't know about that.
is it malicious or is it just some manifestation of stupidity? Like, what the hell?
It could be several things, to be completely honest
Could
with
be all
you.
of it, yeah. Do people not know what detergent is? Like, what the hell?
Well, I mean, there's also, and I think we've talked about this before, there's like this crazy kind of um I guess movement now where kids feel like they have to, and I mean I've experienced this with Zephyr, have to make themselves marketable content because they're presented with so much on a day-to-day basis that shows them, well, if what I'm doing can be made to seem interesting, I can make money doing it,
Hmm.
right? Like Zephyr talks about it all the time. He wants to be a, Twitch streamer, not because he wants to enjoy playing video games, because he wants to make money, because he wants, clout or notoriety, or he wants people to think he's famous, So like, is there a line of where even if you put warning labels on things that people are exploiting the naivety
Ah,
of
naivety.
the gullibility of people who maybe are chasing that specific thing, and the power that you hold as someone who is viewed in that way, of influencing them. And I think that's a completely different conversation than really what we're trying to say
Yeah.
with, warning labels and things.
But there's certainly an element of behaviors being modeled, right? Like if you think about, with Zephyr, like where does this attitude come from? Well,
Well, I mean,
he's consuming content and then he's modeling the same behavior, right? So it's like
mhm.
we the influence, I guess that's where the term influencer comes from, right? Is like the influence a role model has on us is huge on your behavior for sure. And I think
Absolutely.
people, I think we've talked about perspectives and things like that. People, I think when they hear the term role model, they think, oh, this is somebody. They might think of a sports star that does charitable shit. They don't realize that every single person is a role model. Like a role model isn't always a good person. The behavior they're modeling is not always good. I think people associate role model with good behavior. No,
Mhm.
everyone is a role model. The things I do, I mean, I don't have anybody in my home, but when I go out and about, anybody that observes me, I might become a role model to them. If
Well,
the
I mean,
sit
I've talked about how when I was a young person and I didn't have a support system, I didn't have people in my life, that I would watch people
right,
to see what I was supposed to be doing, or like how I conduct myself, or figure out like, how different people experience things to keep myself kind of in the middle. And so I feel what you're talking about. I've experienced that exact thing, but I don't think that the way that people are presented with the idea of role models is conducive to that thought. Like everything that we're ever taught about who a role model is or what they should be. And that's like a whole other thing too. Like, what are they actually versus like what you're taught they should be to you?
hmm,
And a lot of times, because that information is so not only skewed, but uh, biased by your own human experience, people tend to put tons of the wrong people in that position.
Yeah, well, it's just like it's human nature, it seems, right? And it
Hmm.
makes sense. It's, I think you've said it before, the monkey see, monkey do mechanic. That's, I think, what makes humans and primates and shit so effective is we're good at modeling behavior that we see around us and hopefully recognizing the poor behavior, right? Like if the monkey eats the mushroom and the monkey dies, hopefully that monkey figures out don't eat the mushroom, right?
Hmm.
But it doesn't always go that way. Sometimes the monkey eats the Tide Pod and then all the other monkeys eat the Tide Pods for some reason, you know what I mean? Because internet clout, I suppose. Um,
Tons of
yeah,
people say tons of problematic things on the internet to get clout. I'll tell you that right now.
yeah. I remember reading something about, this might be a little bit adjacent, but like the rise in populist policies and like why the hell are so many right wingers like, or I should frame that a bit better, but why do all of the like racist organizations seem to follow the same political candidates? Like they seem to unite over certain people, certain idols. I'm sure you can
Hmm.
figure out who I'm alluding to. Um, and there was an interesting thing I read, I don't remember where this individual gave those people permission to feel and act the way they feel without feeling guilt. So essentially, like if you are a racist, misogynistic asshole, I won't make you feel bad about it. So vote for
Hmm.
me because the liberals are obviously going to make you feel bad about this.
Hmm.
So in a way, it's like, I don't want to say like racism is human nature, but I think it's sort of like,
Racism is taught. It is absolutely a learned behavior.
I think there's an element of it where like people are just naturally curious by anything that's like different, right? So if you grow up in a community like I grew up in where it's pretty much just white people, it's kind of exciting to come to the city and see all sorts of different cultural people, but it's like it's
But
just,
racism doesn't stem from curiosity. Racism stems from fear.
I think you're right.
And that type of fear is taught. It is not innate. It is not innate to see someone of color and be fearful of them. You
No.
are taught that. And I think that there's definitely people that prop up the egos of people who have that fear and offer them safe haven and a safe place to exist in that fear. But what isn't okay and how those people abuse that power is then using it to forward their own agenda because those people feel safe and coddled by that as opposed to safe and challenged by that.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what I was getting to is like, there's human nature elements in there that we recognize. Think some people are different from us. We just simply recognize it, and I think that's human nature. But like you said, the racism and the fear and stuff is kind of taught and cultivated by somebody that has other motives, right? There's a there's some human nature being taken advantage of there, I think. Um, and fear is very motivating, you know. And
Hmm.
if you can motivate or if you can identify people that look different than you do and teach people to be afraid of them, it's almost like by being afraid of those people you're more welcome to me or I'm more palatable to you or whatever, right?
Hmm.
uh, a political scientist could probably explain what I'm trying to say more eloquently than I could.